The stranger in the garage. The first snowflakes of winter began to fall as Sarah Chen locked up the small hardware store where she worked the evening shift. The cold December air bit at her cheeks as she walked the 3 blocks home to her modest house on Maple Street. It had been another long day, but she was grateful for the job, even though it barely covered her mortgage and basic expenses. Sarah had inherited the little blue house from her grandmother 2 years ago, along with all the memories that filled its rooms. The garage, however, had become her sanctuary. She had converted half of it into a small workshop where she spent her free time refinishing old furniture. She found at garage sales and thrift stores. It was her quiet escape from the pressures of making ends meet as a single woman in her late 20s. As she turned the corner onto her street, Sarah noticed a figure sitting on the steps of the abandoned house next door. The old Victorian had been empty for months, ever since the previous owner had moved to a nursing home. Through the swirling snow, she could see it was a man in a worn gray coat, his shoulders hunched against the cold dot. Sarah paused at her mailbox, stealing glances at the stranger. He appeared to be in his 30s, with dark hair that needed cutting and stubble covering his jaw. His clothes were wrinkled and he carried a small backpack, the kind someone might use for traveling light. Everything about him suggested he had nowhere to go on this increasingly bitter night. The temperature was supposed to drop to 15 degrees. Sarah knew this because she had been carefully monitoring the weather, worried about her heating bill, and whether her old furnace would make it through another winter. The thought of anyone spending the night outside in these conditions made her stomach tighten with concern. She fumbled with her keys, torn between her natural compassion and the practical voice in her head that warned her to mind her own business. Her grandmother had always said that kindness was never wasted, but the world felt different now, more dangerous and unpredictable. That as Sarah opened her front door, she glanced back one more time. The man was still there, now standing and looking up at the sky as the snow fell more heavily. He had pulled his coat tighter around himself, but she could see him shivering even from across the yard. 20 minutes later, after changing into warm clothes and making herself a cup of tea, Sarah found herself putting on her coat again. She couldn't shake the image of the stranger in the cold. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, along with all the stories of helping neighbors and strangers that had shaped Sarah's childhood. She walked across her yard and approached the man carefully. "Excuse me," she called out softly, not wanting to startle him. "Are you okay?" The man turned, and Sarah could see his face clearly for the first time. Despite his disheveled appearance, his eyes were kind and intelligent. There was something gentle about his expression that immediately put her at ease. "I'm fine, thank you," he said, his voice cultured and polite. "Just waiting for the weather to clear a bit." Sarah looked up at the heavy clouds. The snow was falling, faster now, and the wind was picking up. "It's supposed to get really cold tonight. Do you have somewhere to go?" The man hesitated, and Sarah could see pride warring with necessity in his expression. "I'll figure something out," he said quietly. "My garage has heat," Sarah found herself saying before she could stop herself. "It's not much, but it's warm and dry. You're welcome to spend the night there if you need to." The surprise on the man's face was genuine. "That's very kind of you, but I couldn't impose." "It's no imposition," Sarah said, surprised by her own boldness. "I have some extra blankets, and there's a small bathroom you can use. It's better than freezing out here." After a moment of internal debate, the man nodded gratefully. "Thank you. I'm David, by the way." "Sarah," she replied with a small smile. "Come on, let me show you where everything is." Sarah led David around to the side of her house where the garage door stood. Inside, her workshop took up half the space, with several pieces of furniture in various stages of restoration. The other half was empty except for some storage boxes and garden tools. A small space heater in the corner kept the area comfortably warm. "This is really nice," David said, looking around at her work. "You refinish furniture?" "It's just a hobby," Sarah said, feeling suddenly shy. "I find old pieces and try to give them new life. It's relaxing." David walked over to examine a small dining table she had been working on. His fingers traced the smooth surface where she had carefully sanded away years of wear. "This is beautiful work. You have a real talent." Sarah felt herself blush. "Thank you. Let me get those blankets." She returned with an armload of quilts and pillows, along with a thermos of hot coffee and some sandwiches she had quickly put together. "It's not much, but it should help keep you warm." David accepted the items with obvious gratitude. "You don't know how much this means to me. It's been a difficult few weeks." Something in his tone made Sarah want to ask more, but she respected his privacy. "Well, you're safe here. The bathroom is just through that door, and feel free to use the heater as much as you need. I'll be in the house if you need anything." That night, Sarah lay in bed thinking about the stranger in her garage. She wondered what circumstances had led him to be alone on the streets in winter. Despite her initial nervousness, something about David had seemed trustworthy. There was an educated quality to his speech and a gentleness in his manner that suggested he hadn't always lived this way. The next morning, Sarah woke early and made extra coffee and breakfast. When she opened the garage door, she found David, already awake, carefully folding the blankets she had given him. "Good morning," she said, offering him a steaming mug. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in weeks," David replied honestly. Thank you again for your kindness." They sat together on a pair of old chairs Sarah kept in the garage, drinking coffee and watching the snow that continued to fall outside. In the morning light, Sarah noticed details she had missed the night before. Despite his worn clothes, David wore an expensive-looking watch, and his hands were soft, not weathered by manual labor. "Sarah," David said carefully, "I need to tell you something. I haven't been entirely honest about who I am." Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness but waited for him to continue. "My name really is David, but I'm not actually homeless. I'm David Morrison, and I own Morrison Industries." He paused, watching her reaction. "I've been taking a break from my life, trying to figure some things out. I've been staying in shelters and on the streets for the past month, trying to understand what it's like for people who don't have the privileges I've always taken for granted." Sarah stared at him, processing this information. Morrison Industries was a huge company with stores throughout the region. "You're rich," she said. Simply, David nodded. "Very, and last night, your kindness reminded me why I started this journey in the first place. You didn't help me because you thought you'd get something in return. You helped because it was the right thing to do." Over the next hour, David explained how he had been struggling with the disconnect between his wealth and the real world. He had been searching for meaning and purpose, trying to understand how he could use his resources to make a genuine difference. "I'd like to do something for you," David said. "Not as payment for last night, but because I see something special in what you do here. Your furniture restoration, your eye for beauty and forgotten things. It reminds me that everything deserves a second chance." 3 months later, Sarah was the owner of a fully-equipped furniture restoration workshop, funded by a grant from the Morrison Foundation. But more than that, she had gained a friend who understood the value of quiet kindness and second chances. David had returned to his company with a new perspective, implementing programs to help employees and creating foundations to assist people experiencing homelessness. And sometimes, on snowy evenings, he would stop by Sarah's workshop to drink coffee and remember the night that changed both their lives. The little blue house on Maple Street had always been a place of warmth and kindness. Now it was also a reminder that sometimes the most important moments come disguised as ordinary acts of human decency, and that generosity has a way of returning to those who give it freely.